Good late afternoon. I am honoured to present some of my historical geography research here today at the Qualcomm Institute. I have been in Israel since November 2024 as a postdoctoral researcher in two departments of the Jewish Studies faculty, as you see here. I won't read this abstract. It's for those who wish to pause the video. While investigating the Israelite wilderness itinerary, I wrestled with how ancient people defined and delimited regions. I came to suspect that the wildernesses were connected to the major water catchments. In this NASA satellite image, you can see the great river system of Wadi al-Arish in the central Sinai Peninsula. It looks like a great, dry, white leaf with its stem in the Mediterranean Sea and all its tributaries like veins. We flew over this catchment yesterday from Aqaba to Port Said in flying around Israel to the south from Amman. And it was exactly as it looks here, but much closer up. With historical geography methods, I discovered this catchment fulfills the biblical requirements for the wilderness of Sin. That is, sin with a samech, not sin with a tzadi. With this revelation, a hydrological model of the biblical wildernesses and national territories took shape. But let's start with the foundational catchments, the oceans, seas, and lakes. What I will offer to you and outline today is a new system for understanding the biblical regions. Here the map is east-oriented for better sizing. These are the three primary catchments of the biblical arena. All the water in the region ultimately drains into one of three base water bodies, memorably named the Med, Red, and Dead Seas. The dark lines are the watersheds between the catchments. Now, the word watershed has two understandings. The American meaning is the entire area draining into a river system, or other body of water, or the British meaning is the ridge of high land dividing two areas that are drained by different river systems. And I will use the term watershed in the latter sense, the British sense, thus the dividing ridge between two drainage areas, while referring to drainage areas as catchments or basins when appropriate. Not all catchments are basins. The Dead Sea is not strictly a sea in English terminology, rather it is a lake system, but Biblical Hebrew does not distinguish between them, yam. Secondary catchments are the major river systems and lake basins within those primary catchments. For the sake of simplicity, the secondary catchments of the Sinai Negev and the Transjordan are here named for their central riverbeds or lakes. This map shows their current names in Arabic, Hebrew, or English. I am making no political statements with my choice of names, just what people will recognise as either the common names or the biblical names or the modern names of these regions. I hired a professional cartography firm in Wisconsin, USA, to make these watershed maps. They used hydrological and topographical data from the World Wildlife Fund. So these maps are not my creations, although I told the cartographers what to include and exclude. It makes good sense that ancient nations might divide and define the land by its river systems. Each water catchment has its own ecology, with its unique elevation, climate, geology, flora, and fauna. My focus is on the regions of the Israelite exodus, wanderings, and eastern conquest. So you see the smaller drainage systems along the Red, Med, and Dead Sea coasts are unmarked, while the river systems and lake basins of the Sinai, Negev, and Transjordan are marked. This is for the sake of simplicity and in order to focus on the major inland water catchments. Of course, Egypt was probably delimited by the Nile catchment from the first cataract northward. But I am only concerned with identifying the regions of the wilderness journeys. According to the Torah and subsequent references in Tanakh, that's the main scope of my research. Once I received these maps of the major river systems and their watersheds, I set about to test my hydrological hypothesis by matching those regions with biblical names, while taking into consideration all textual and geographical indications. So here is the same map, but with my proposed connections with the biblical wildernesses. And on this map, W stands for wilderness, not west. And in Transjordan, also my proposed names for national territories, named in the narrative of the Israelite journeys. I found the hydrological hypothesis not only worked well, but it also shed light on the regions of that era. Some regions are single water catchments. Some comprise 2 or more catchments, and others are half catchments, that is, the area between a central riverbed and its outer watershed on one side. The white dotted lines dividing some of the river catchments indicate a few tertiary catchments with their own names. Tertiary catchments are the next level in a river system, that is, the main tributaries of secondary catchments. Excuse me. Some tertiary catchments are named in the biblical record and are significant to the narrative of the Israelite journeys. In 25 minutes today, I cannot explain all my choices here, but I can show how this model can transform our understanding of historical geography. But the named regions are not all hydrological. There are named topographical regions also. The hydrological regions are named wildernesses and national territories inhabited by nations and tribes throughout the biblical period. These wildernesses and national territories are the major river systems and lake basins of Bible lands, with the watersheds and riverbeds providing distinct borders, both external and internal. But the topographical regions in the right map have indistinct borders according to location and elevation. Thus they overlap or they transition from one to the next. You have some time to look at these maps. I'll just change the titles and some of the text. We could describe these in these same categories as geopolitical and geomorphic. The geomorphic regions, or geozones for short, are large blocks of land with a mountain range, tableland, depression, or coastal plain. Of course, geomorphic regions give rise to the river systems. We know that. But one mountain range can generate multiple water catchments, whilst being known and named as a single geomorphic unit in and of itself. Unlike the pattern for the geopolitical regions, which stretch over from Sinai to Egypt, the biblical authors only mention geomorphic regions as far as a line approximating the way of the Red Sea or the Darb al-Gaza along the idealized southern border of Israel. The geozones underlie the wildernesses and territories, that is, they share the same terrain. Thus, there is no competition between geopolitical and geomorphic regions. They are distinguished by different principles and must be mapped separately. This revelation helps a lot in resolving apparent geographical conflicts. Bible cartographers have been trying to cram all these regions onto one map, trying to make them equivalent in their properties and hence mutually exclusive, not understanding the different determinants, both geographical and toponymical. Unlike the Wildernesses and National Territories map, which is empirical, objective perhaps, the geozones map is schematic, subjective perhaps. This is the place to mention that some geozones function as national territories. They are whole river catchments which are possessed by a single nation in each biblical era. So they are both national territories and geozones. So, for example, the Bashan, as the entire river Yarmouk catchment, is a geozone, but it's also a national territory because it is a depression relative to the regions around it, hence a geozone, but it's a river catchment, hence a national territory. So you're going to see a little bit of that. And finally, though perhaps this should be the first slide in this series, in support of the hydrological system for defining biblical regions, there is also a toponymical system. In the biblical narrative, the wildernesses of the Israelite journeys are always prefixed with Midbar, wilderness. So we have, for example, Midbar Paran and Midbar Sinai. The national territories of the same narratives are sometimes prefixed with the word Eretz, land. So sometimes we read simply of Goshen or Edom, but sometimes we read of Eretz Goshen or Eretz Edom. And then, with the exception of Seir, all geozones are mentioned at least once in the Hebrew Bible with the definite article ha. For example, Ha-Gilad and Ha-Mishor. Geozones are also sometimes designated with Eretz, but the definite article is the determinant. Now, I know I said my scope is limited to the Sinai, Negev and Transjordan, but the geozones of the Cisjordan are also mentioned at least once in the Hebrew Bible with the definite article. For example, Ha-Galil and Ha-Sharon, and they are found in the texts shown here in the C on the right map. Now, note that the geozone called the Goshen, or Ha-Goshen in Joshua 11 verse 16, is not the same as the national territory of Egypt, called simply Goshen or Eretz Goshen in Genesis 45 and Exodus 9. In Cisjordan, it is the marginal land between the Shephelah and the Negev, an area which seems to approximate the region now called the Western Negev, or as we know it more recently as Otef Gaza. And in the bottom right of the right map, I've put these toponymical patterns for the biblical regions expressed as formulae. Wildernesses are always wilderness of X, Midbar X. National territories are land of X or X. And geozones are land of the X or simply X. And this formula is remarkably consistent. Now, just back to the first slide in this series, some will have noticed, as I said, that the Bashan appears in both maps. So does the Negev, the Mishor, and the Argob. And some will have also noticed that Moab in the right map is in square brackets. Because Moab is not a geozone, it never appears as Ha-Moab, it is a national territory. The geomorphic name for that part of the Moabite plateau south of the Arnon has not survived in the biblical texts. A hydrological model of biblical regions is especially enlightening in the Transjordan. With higher elevation and more rainfall, there are 4 great perennial rivers. The Yarmouk, which is not named in the Bible, the Jabbok, the Arnon, and the Zered. And again, for this series of maps, I'll just change the titles. As it happens, there are also 4 greater national territories of the biblical era. In Genesis 14 and Deuteronomy 2, we read of 4 indigenous nations of Transjordan, from north to south, the Rephaim, the Emim, the Zamzumim, and the Horim. By a hydrological model, these indigenous nations correspond to the 4 major river catchments. As you can see, in the south, the northern watershed for Nahal Zered, which is Wadi al-Hassa, is almost right on the riverbed. So the Zered riverbed was always effectively the ancient border between Greater Edom and Greater Moab. The Bashan, that is the Yarmouk catchment, never takes a national name, according to the biblical texts. But after the 4 indigenous peoples of the Transjordan in their 4 greater national territories were dispossessed, The 3 other river catchments were renamed for Abrahamic nations: Ammon, Moab, and Edom. Each national territory included the section of the Rift Valley immediately adjacent to its major river catchment, and this is borne out by the descriptions of King Sihon and King Og's territories, which are later taken by the tribes of Menashe, Gad, and Reuven. The white line represents the approximate 200 millimetre rainfall line, which varies by the year, of course, but beyond which, to the east and the south, you cannot grow crops. Hence, the wilderness areas of the Transjordan are on the eastern steppe. This rainfall line divides the agricultural regions to the west from the pastoral regions to the east. Hence, the settled agricultural regions with walled towns lie to the west of this line on the plateau, and their pastoral wildernesses lie to the east on the steppe. Greater Bashan has a high rainfall throughout, between 300 and 600 millimetres a year, and has rich volcanic soil. Hence, it is a lush breadbasket, even today, as evidenced by the high number of farming villages in southwest Syria. So these 4 national regions broadly support 4 different subsistence lifestyles: wetter to drier, north to south, and west to east. Geographer Dennis Bailey refers to the 4 lifestyles of Transjordan: from north to south, the farmer of Bashan, the highlander of Ammon, the shepherd of Moab, and the trader or miner of Edom. This regional model helps explain why the outer borders and boundaries of the biblical period remained fixed through several changes of national and tribal rule, that is, indigenous, Abrahamic, Amorite, and Israelite, thus confirming the principle of geographic determinism, or more specifically, hydrological determinism. By a hydrological model of the geopolitical regions, the whole northern catchment of the Arnon was originally part of Moab's greater national territory. Then, shortly before Israel arrived, the Moabites were driven south of the Arnon riverbed by the Amorite king Sihon. So a hydrological model alone explains why the southern Jordan Valley is still called Aravot Moav, or the plains of Moab, even during the conquest and kingdom phase of early Israelite history. Each greater national territory of Transjordan has a pastoral wilderness, and this is important, within the same water catchment. So starting in the south, Edom and Midbar Edom both lie within the Zered river system. Agricultural Edom to the west of the rainfall line, and the wilderness of Edom to the east. Likewise, agricultural Moab and its pastoral wilderness of Moab both lie within the southern Arnon river system, as does the Moabite territory of Ar, which is a transitional region on the steppe. Northern Moab and its pastoral wilderness of Kedemot both lie within the northern Arnon river system on the Mishor. Highland Ammon and its pastoral wilderness of Jazer or Ya'azer both lie within the Jabbok river system. Now, relocating Jazer is a separate topic which I am about to publish, so I can't make the full case here. Something very interesting happens for the Bashan, however. The Bashan and its pastoral wilderness, Hevel Argob, are mentioned together in many confusing texts. Consistent with a hydrological model of one major river system per greater national territory, the Bashan is associated with the entire Yarmouk river system. But where is Hevel Argob? There is almost no 200 millimetre rainfall line in the Yarmouk catchment to divide Argob from Bashan. The word Hevel means chord or coast, which suits the line of the upper Jordan River and Lake Kinneret coastline. Thus, the hydrological model shows that of the 4 wildernesses of Transjordan, only the Argob lies to the west of its mother country, the Bashan, because the pattern is reversed in the north for the different conditions. I've read that bit. Unlike the other national wildernesses, Hevel Gob is a separate water catchment to its mother country. It's not within the Yarmouk catchment. That is, it is the eastern half of the Upper Jordan and Kinneret catchment, bounded by a line from Mount Hermon's Peak southward along the Golan watershed to the Yarmouk River mouth just a few kilometres south of Lake Kinneret. There is no lack of rain in the Golan by comparison with the wildernesses on Transjordan Eastern Steppe, but the slopes down to the Upper Jordan River and Lake Kinneret are deeply eroded by gullies and scattered with basalt boulders, so in ancient times only herds and flocks could graze and grow there. With this model, I have discovered that the ancient regions of Geshur and Ma'acha are in the Upper Jordan Valley, below the slopes of Mount Hermon, in the valley floor running north-south. I suggest that Ma'acha possessed the Chula Valley in the north part of the valley floor, and Geshur possessed the Chorazim Plateau and the Upper Kinneret Basin in the south of the valley floor. Thereby, the whole Upper Jordan and Kinneret catchment was divided into halves. The western half was the possession, later to be the possession of the tribe of Naphtali. The eastern half was the possession of the tribe of half Manasseh. But during the Israelite conquest and well beyond into the King's period, the small Aramean nations of Geshur and Ma'acha retained their tribal territory in the Chula Valley and the Chorazim Plateau, in the valley floor of the Upper Jordan between these two tribes of Israel. So back to this map of the four greater territories according to their watershed borders. These four greater territories of Transjordan remained relatively stable until the invasion by the two Amorite kings, King Og and King Sichon. King Og simply took the entire Bashan and Hevel Gob, with Deuteronomy 3 suggesting that he was of Rephaim descent himself. So his invasion of the Bashan and the Argob may have been more like a merger or a coup. But King Sichon had to contend with the Bnei Ammon and Moab, and he took only half of their territories. This was the era when the original greater national territories as single major river catchments were subdivided. I propose that King Sichon necessarily took a hydrological approach to the Bnei Ammon. He drove them back inside the curve of the Jabbok River, that is, the inner catchment of the Jabbok, while he took all the outer catchment of the Jabbok River from the Jabbok riverbed to the outer Jabbok watershed. And Sichon also drove the Moabites southward beyond the Arnon riverbed into the southern Arnon catchment. So these are my suggested geopolitical divisions of northern and central Transjordan after the Amorite invasion, and it's all in keys, letters of the alphabet for the names of the kings and tribes. We have the Amorite kingdoms on the left map, and we have the Israelite tribal allotments on the right map. This base map also ghosts in Naphtali's territory in the western Kinneret catchment, but of course that was not until after the Israelite conquest. With King Og's defeat, the half-tribe of Manasseh took possession of his premier agricultural estate in the Yarmouk and the eastern Kinneret catchments, that is, the entire Bashan and Hevel Gob over to the Upper Jordan Valley, to the territory of Geshur and Ma'acha. So the O symbols for Og in the left map are simply replaced with M symbols for Menashe in the right map. But with King Sichon's defeat, the tribes of Reuben and Gad divided his territory between them. So all the S symbols for Sichon are replaced, half with G symbols for Gad in Gilead and half with R symbols for Reuben in the Mishor. Both Reuben and Gad divided the Jordan Valley according to the same Amorite divisions of the Jordan Valley. Thus the tribe of Gad took the same outer half of Greater Ammon that Sichon had already seized, leaving Ammon within the same enclave within the curve of the Jabbok River. Now we know that some warriors of Gad also defended the southern border with Moab as shown. And I think this tells us something a little bit about the national characteristics of Reuben and Gad, which can be expanded in other texts. These warriors of Gad are mentioned in the Mesha Stela some centuries later. The tribe of Reuben took the same half of Greater Moab that King Sichon had already seized, And so these 3 Israelite tribal territories map onto the 2 Amorite kings' holdings without any border changes. So the original geopolitical regions of Transjordan are subdivided by invaders, but their outer borders, their watershed borders, remain unchanged. So let's compare the best popular map I could find of the biblical regions. The map of biblical districts in the New Moody Bible Atlas 2009. Just looking at the Transjordan now, alongside my hydrological map of the geopolitical regions. As you see on the Moody map on the left, the eastern borders are sketchy and arbitrary, unrelated to river systems or even geographical features. The wildernesses of the Transjordan, Edom, Moab or Kedemot, are unrepresented. Few atlases try to represent the obscure regions of Ar in Moab or Hevel Argob of the Bashan. But with a hydrological approach, all the wildernesses and national territories are represented and delineated. The value of this new model of identifying the biblical regions is the method. The hydrological elements are riverbeds, watersheds, and a rainfall line. Such a model also gives distinct boundaries for all the wildernesses and national territories of the Exodus wanderings and Eastern Conquest era. Finally, and this is where I started, this arrangement of biblical regions makes a wilderness itinerary solution possible. With such a patchwork map of regions as a foundation, it becomes possible to trace the roads and campsites of the Israelite journeys from Egypt to Canaan via the Sinai, Negev and Transjordan. I thank you all for your attention and I welcome all engagement with these ideas. I hope you find a hydrology model helps to better understand the regions of the Exodus era. Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any questions? Oh, Tom.
Hi, Deb.
Hey.
Thank you very much. I was wondering on your last slide, when you were relying on the Moody Atlas,
Yes.
why you didn't want to use Anson Rainey's Carta Biblical Atlases? Did you?
I had to just choose one. I actually did do a presentation once where I went through all the atlas, the well-known atlases, and compared them with this model. I just chose Barry's because it was the easiest to line up with mine. They all have shortcomings. Some of them attempt to give you those wildernesses in the east. Most of them don't. And a lot of them, they don't even put a border around a lot of these areas. They put just a vague label on the map, which sort of indicates where they think it is, and they don't give you what he has done here and actually tried to outline it very clearly. I also wanted to show you, I didn't say this, but he offsets the Gilead from Ammon, and lots of atlases do this. As I said, they treat them. The Ha-Gilad is a geozone. Ammon or Eretz Ammon or Bnei Ammon is a national territory. So you can't. You're comparing apples with oranges here. You can't put them side by side as if there is a border between them because Ammon overlies Ha-Gilad. But so if I had put it into my notes, that's what I would have said. That this map is also useful for showing how cartographers typically try to cram the geozones in the same map with the wildernesses and national territories, and it's just too hard and doesn't work.
Any other questions? Yeah, that's one.
This makes really a lot of sense.
Sorry, I didn't hear.
This makes a lot of sense to use the...
Can you come to a microphone? Thank you.
Yes,
The hydrological approach is very interesting, makes a lot of sense.
It does.
Yes, because civilizations depend on water, and so it makes sense that they concentrate around riversheds. But there's other situations around the world where rivers become boundaries, especially when they're contested between neighboring civilizations. So my question is, why do you think that in this region it would be what you call the watershed, so the limiting boundaries as opposed to the river itself, if there will be conflicts around it?
That's a terrific question because I didn't get to that, and I will now. Early in biblical history, if we do believe it is history, these were mostly pastoral people who were migrating across the regions, and they found a good place and they stayed. And nomadic peoples define their borders by mountains. In fact, the word for border, gvul, is the same, is a cognate of the same jebel or gebel, which is mountain. So we are talking about watersheds, and this is how they positioned themselves, and the riverbed itself was central to that, but it wasn't the border. They would graze their flocks across both sides of the whole area, the whole catchment. But as these nations settled down and became agricultural and built towns and so on and so forth, geographical features like riverbeds became important. And they were sort of like obstacles, physical obstacles, and also defensive functions as well. And we see what happens is that when Sichon and Og come into the picture, that is when they drive the native peoples who are not now native, because it's Ammon and Moab and Edom, but they drive the inhabitants below or within riverbeds. And this is where these greater watershed boundaries are, greater watershed catchments are subdivided into a northern catchment and a southern catchment. Does that answer what you were saying? Yeah.
Thank you.